All right, today we're going to talk about a microscopic frenemy. It's an organism that lives inside most of us totally silently. But, you know, give it just the right opportunity, and this quiet little roommate can turn into a serious invader. Yep, we're talking about Candida. It's a pretty startling thought, isn't it? I mean, think about it. Right now, inside most of us, there's a fungus just hanging out, coexisting with all the other microbes in our own personal ecosystem. It's actually one of the most common residents we've got. Yep, that's the number. Somewhere between 50 and 60% of the population. In scientific terms, it's called a commensal, which is just a fancy way of saying it's kind of like a freeloader that lives with us, but, under normal circumstances doesn't cause any trouble. It's just part of the crowd. Okay, so let's get properly introduced to this roommate we never actually signed a lease with. Candida is a type of yeast. And look, when everything's in balance, it lives pretty peacefully alongside the trillions of other microbes that make up our body's super complex internal world. So let's take a look. This right here is our fungal roommate, up close and personal. See, in its harmless state, it just exists as these little individual oval-shaped cells. Scientists call them blastospores. And really, most of the time, they're just hanging out, minding their own business on the surfaces inside us. Okay, so to really get a handle on Candida, we first have to see it in its default mode. Not as a threat, but just, as a harmless resident. So in a healthy person, our immune system and all the friendly bacteria we have are constantly keeping Candida in check. It's this really beautifully balanced ecosystem where no single microbe is allowed to get too powerful. Candida is just one player in a massive orchestra. But what happens when that balance gets thrown off? Well, this is where our story takes a pretty dramatic turn, and our so-called friend starts to show a very, very different side. There's this saying in medicine that really gets right to the heart of it, that Candida infections are the disease of the diseased. What does that mean? It means it doesn't attack the strong. It's an opportunist. It waits for a moment of weakness in the very young, the very old, or anyone whose immune system is compromised. So what is that trigger exactly? What gives Candida the green light to switch from being a passive resident to a full-blown active invader? Well, it turns out there are a lot of triggers. Some of them are like a full-scale assault on our internal ecosystem, right? Things like broad-spectrum antibiotics that just wipe out all the good guy bacteria, or a weakened immune system that can't really police the neighborhood anymore. But other triggers can be way more local. Stuff like dry mouth, or even ill-fitting dentures that create the perfect, cozy little breeding ground for Candida to just take over. And this is where things get really fascinating. See, to launch its attack, Candida does something incredible. It physically transforms. It performs what scientists call a morphological switch. It goes from those harmless, individual yeast cells you see on the left to the invasive form on the right, where it grows these long, branching filaments called hyphae. Just think of it like a harmless little seed suddenly sprouting these invasive roots that can literally dig into and damage our tissues. This shape-shifting ability, that's the real key to its power. So, okay, when Candida does make this invasive turn, what are the telltale signs? I mean, how does this invasion actually show up in the body? Well, in the mouth, this overgrowth can show up in a few pretty distinct ways, and this table breaks them down for us really clearly. So first up in that pseudo-membranous column, you've got the classic infection most people have heard of, thrush. You can see it's defined by those white, kind of curd-like patches. But then look over at the erythematous form. It's totally different. Just red, raw-looking areas, and a lot of the time it's painless. And then finally, on the far right, we have the hyperplastic type. This stuff shows up as these really stubborn, raised white plaques that you just can't wipe away. And this is why being able to tell them apart is so, so critical. Because while thrush might be the one we hear about most, it's that hyperplastic form that carries the most serious risk. Yeah, if it's left untreated, a pretty significant percentage of these lesions actually have the potential to become cancerous. It's a really powerful reminder of why you have to take this fungus seriously. So naturally, this leads to the detective work. With all these different symptoms and risks on the table, how do doctors and scientists actually confirm that Candida is the real culprit here? The whole process is really about gathering conclusive evidence. It kicks off with step 1, collecting a sample, right? A swab or a rinse from the area that's affected. Then, for step 2, they take that sample and look at it under a microscope. They're looking for the classic signs of an invasion, especially those root-like hyphae we were just talking about. And finally, for the definitive, slam dunk proof, they move to step 3. They actually grow the fungus in a lab culture. And this slide right here, this shows us exactly what that aha moment looks like for a diagnostician. On the left, you can see the microscopic evidence. You're not just seeing the single yeast cells, but those long, thread-like hyphae that confirm there's an active invasion happening. And on the right, well, that's the big proof. When you grow it in the lab on a special medium, Candida forms these very distinct, creamy white colonies. That is the definitive signature. Okay, so once the intruder is positively identified, how do we fight back? Let's dive into the treatment strategies. Fortunately, we have a whole arsenal of antifungal agents, and this table here shows us the main classes. So for example, take a look at that top row, the polyens. You can think of these guys as demolition experts. They literally bind to the fungus's cell wall and just punch holes in it. Then you've got the azoles. They're more like saboteurs. They mess with the fungus's ability to even build and maintain its cell wall in the first place. So see, each class has its own unique strategy for taking the invader down. But here is maybe the single most important thing to remember when it comes to treatment. The medicine, that's only half the battle. If you don't fix the underlying issue that gave Candida its opening in the first place, whether that's managing diabetes or improving denture hygiene or whatever it is, the infection is almost certainly going to come back. You've got to fix the environment, not just get rid of the pest. So there you have it, the two-faced story of Candida. It's this constant, fascinating reminder of the delicate, super complex balance of the ecosystem inside every single one of us, and just how quickly a friend can turn into a foe when that balance is lost. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. We now know our bodies host an entire community of fungi, what scientists are calling the mycobiome. And Candida, it's just the most famous member of that community. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other silent partners are living with us right now, just waiting for their opportunity?